All right, what is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. It's your boy Frost in Austin. I am just wrapping up a guide trip today, and we caught them pretty good on a glide bait, and something that, you know, I'm passionate about. If you have followed the channel for years, you guys know that I am a die-hard glide bait fisherman, swim bait fisherman, big baits in general. I love throwing large baits for targeting large bass, whether it be largemouth, smallmouth, or spotted bass. But today I am going to go over some of my 100% must-do glide bait fishing tips so you can go have success on the water. You can have more confidence when you pick it up. You can lock it in your hand and say, hey, I got confidence with this thing. I'm gonna keep it in my hand, I'm gonna throw it a bunch, and I'm gonna have some success with it. So without further ado, I'm gonna go over some of my favorite techniques, tips, little modifications that may be sneaky, some things you may have heard of, some things you may have never heard of. I am going to go over all things glide bait fishing tips in this video. So let's make it happen. Here we go. If you're a frequent watcher, maybe this is your first time, I hope you enjoy the video, but I would love for you to subscribe to the channel. Bottom right-hand corner, click subscribe, hit notifications, and you will be notified every time we are coming out with awesome educational, fun content. All right, so got the front deck of the boat. I've got a clutch darter here. I've got a clutch boss right up there underneath some rods. And I'm just gonna show you guys a couple things just first and foremost that I am doing with these swim baits that make a ton of difference. So I'm a really firm believer with glide bait fishing that you have to get away with as many hooks or as big of hooks as possible. I know there's tons of other swim baiters out there. One of my really good buddies, Mike Gilbert with Working Class Zero, he has content out there talking about, you know, downsize your hooks to upsize your bites. I don't disagree with that, but I do things differently. And the first thing I do is, this is one of my favorite glide baits of ever, and it's a chop style. It's not a traditional glide bait because a traditional glide bait is really gonna glide. It's got a single joint, but it's gonna glide on a retrieve, right? So as I reel this bait, it'll just kind of slalom glide like that. This is a clutch darter. So this is a herring imitating bait. It is an absolutely awesome fish catcher, and it comes with usually two treble hooks right here, one in the chest and then one on the tail section of the bait. I have actually modified that bait right there to have 3 hooks. I did that by taking a 1/16 inch drill bit and punching a hole kind of where its chin would be, where the gills meet the belly or the bottom of it. And then right there on the back, just kind of splitting the difference between where the chest hook was and that joint. And that right there, because listen, glide bait fishing, fish tend to headshot the bait. So for me, I'm always like, okay, how can I get a bait that has a hook that's closer to the head, right? Which this one does. And then on herring lakes specifically, whether it's spotted bass, smallmouth, or largemouth, they all like to swipe the bait. So I have the tendency to just want more hooks. So I actually downsized my hooks, but added more hooks. So I added, you know, it had a size 1 up here and then a size 2 in the back. I just kind of was like, hey, I'm okay with doing all size 2 hooks on this booger as long as I can get 3 on there. And then I actually took and added braided line split rings. They're a little more subtler, they're a little more quiet. I could actually tie those tighter to the bait so I don't have them hanging down. But that right there, I got him. Big one on the darter. I just literally made an adjustment on this darter, and I'll show you guys here in a second, but this fish ain't coming off. So I have been missing like no fish on a Magnum catwalk because it has 3 treble hooks. Well, 4-pounder. I took the darter and moved the hook placement of the hooks and put one closer to the head, one mid-body, and then one up here. And just like that, first fish that tried to eat it got all 3 hooks. Mama's going 315. I'm saying 4.3. No way. 4 pounds, 12 ounces. What? Yeah, just locked on 412. One thing I see a lot of guys do, and you know, they come into the shop, I talk to them online, they comment on the videos, they're like, man, I'm getting a ton of followers, but I'm not getting a ton of commits on the bait. And the big reason is so many guys stop the bait. So when you are chopping your bait, you know, chopping it back and forth, these are some sharp hooks, but chopping it back and forth or gliding it, and you have a fish come up behind it, so many guys, they freeze, they go, and they freeze. You have got to keep that bait chopping and coming. I even speed it up, because what I tell people is, right, have you ever seen a bait fish getting chased by a bass? Bluegill, threadfin, herring, gizzard shad, whatever. They are hauling tail. They are trying to run for their life. I'd never seen them say, oh, there's a bass chasing me, stop. And so many guys stop the bait, and I just have never seen a bait fish in the wild when being chased by a bass stop, unless they're have been inhaled already, right? Then it's like, yeah, they ain't swimming no more. But keep that bait moving. And I'm always throwing it on at least 20-pound test. You can get away with smaller glide baits. Like if you're throwing maybe a 5 or 6 inch glide bait, more of just like what I would say like a numbers bite getter, you could get away with throwing 17-pound, but I would very rarely, I mean, I personally very rarely go lighter than 17-pound. I'm almost exclusively throwing 20-pound test always. But I keep that bait rocking and rolling, coming through the water column, and even when they get it behind it, almost pulling it away like, hey, I'm getting chased by a bass, I'm getting chased by a bass, I'm getting chased by a bass, I need to flee. And that a lot of times triggers that bite.
Got him. There's a 10. That's a 10. That's a 10. That's a 10. I got him. I got him. I'm going to get him. He's hooked so good. You ain't coming off. You ain't coming off, baby. Boom.
All right, the next thing that I'm going to talk about, and this is something that I don't think is a secret at this point, but it is without question one of my favorite things to do, and that is wrap lead wire on the hooks of the baits to get them down to depth that I want them. So I think a seriously underfished technique is glide bait fishing offshore on specific structure, either isolated structure, hard spots, you know, brush, boulders, isolated grass. A glide bait isn't really utilized out there by many people. And this is the reason why. I mean, I definitely understand a lot of people when they go fishing, they only have X amount of time. They retreat back into the things that they're comfortable with, that they have confidence in. I get it. I'm not hating on you at all. I understand. But big bass tend to set up on isolated cover, and there's way more isolated cover offshore a lot of times than there is on the bank. And as people over the years have fished the bank, a lot of people totally leave that isolated offshore stuff alone. So one thing I like to do is I like to, if I'm seeing a brush pile out there, maybe it's in 25 foot of water, it's 7 foot off the bottom, so it comes up to 18 or even shallow or 15 foot of water, I will add lead wire to my bait and get that bait down there and achieve depth faster, because most of your glide baits are going to be slow sink, right? They're going to sink at maybe a half a foot per second or even a foot per second, probably honestly a half foot per second. But I want that bait to get down there with some speed so I can start working that bait. And a lot of people will say, oh man, well, doesn't that affect the action when you are working that bait, right? The answer is yes, it does a little bit. But when you are, back to my first thought, working the bait faster, when you work that bait faster, you don't give it time to sink kind of any sort of way for a fish to get a good look at it. So if it's sinking, I see a follower, I'm gonna be ripping that rod, rip. And you know, I'm gonna be ripping the rod fast, trying to create a reaction strike. And those big bass, I assure you, get really amped up and excited when they see a big gizzard shad profile, big threadfin, big herring profile, speeding up in the water column, cutting back and forth really fast. It really piques their interest and they will go and eat it, all right? Now, the next thing that is really important, and I do it with almost all of my hooks, I am throwing ST41 owners on those hooks. So there's your ST41 owners. And the deal with those hooks, straight up, man, they are a thick gauge and they have, honestly, a pretty large barb. And when the fish get them, I always thought like, oh man, I want a thinner hook for better penetration. But I promise you, and I'm not kidding, I have glide bait fish, honestly, like you can go back on the channel 10 years. We have videos that are 10 years old catching fish, and honestly, maybe even 11 years. But these hooks, the ST41s are so sharp and sticky. I have got ridiculous penetration through bone on their upper corner of their jaws, through just really hard spots on their mouth. Unbelievable penetration, which means, like, dude, they're penetrating, and then that bigger gauge, that bigger diameter gauge and bigger barb is going to keep those fish pinned. So I really think it's important to switch your hooks out to something a little bit beefier. I remember watching a Butch Brown video, and I think Butch is one of the greatest swim bait fishermen of all time. But as a guide for over a decade, I just tend to notice certain things, and I'm like, man, when those fish eat it, if I just swing on them with 20-pound fluorocarbon, dude, that hook is going to penetrate their jaw, and those fish will get in the boat. So that is 100% what I'm doing. But another huge mistake I see guys make, though, is like, okay, once you're hooked up, what can fail? And a lot of that has to do with rod, right? So I'm using very parabolic rods, stuff that's rated for like 6 or 7 ounces. I'm using parabolic rods. They have a lot of bend down into the handle of that rod, because essentially, man, I made this mistake so often early in my career. I'm like, oh, I'm just gonna treat it like it's a jig and single hook, and I'm just gonna rip these fish in. And dude, I had so many giant fish over the years throw my bait, and I'm like, look, I am going to throw a parabolic rod, a softer rod. I mean, this one, I throw all Daiwa rods, but big soft rods, 20-pound test, something that can really absorb their head shakes, because they can get a lot of leverage with these big heavy baits when they're out there head shaking, man. They can freaking get a lot of leverage and throw that bait. So it's really important for me to have something that can load up when they're head shaking. It absorbs those head shakes. I'm throwing, like I said, 20-pound test, and then usually I'm throwing a Tatula 150, Tatula 200, and then on my really big baits, I'll go up to a Tatula 300. But I think all these things matter in a serious way, but all these tips comprehensively together make a big difference. One, fish it faster. You got to fish the bait faster. You're gonna draw fish. It has drawing power, so you're gonna have followers. I assure you, the followers are more apt to bite that bait with more speed. Don't slow it down, right? So combine fishing it faster, getting it down to depth, and then proper hooks for better hookup ratio, having the right rod, having the right line, having the right reel to bring it all together. That is how you make it happen. So anyways, those are some awesome little tips, I hope help you catch more fish and bigger fish when you're out there fishing glide baits. I don't know if you can tell just the number of just tooth marks on these baits. I mean, they absolutely eat them. We fish the absolute turd out of them, man. They're so awesome. Cover a lot of water with these things, make a lot of casts, present the bait a bunch of times, work it fast. I assure you that you will catch more fish on a glide bait. So go out there, give those tips a try, tag us in any pictures on Instagram or Facebook. You can tag my personal account, Frostin' Austin. I will share those. And yeah, man, I love to see people out there having success, catching big bass, using big swim baits, something that I am super passionate about. So anyways, guys, I appreciate you a ton. Thanks for watching. I hope these glide bait fishing tips point you in the right direction and you can go out there and have success.